I am the International Technical Advisor for India and South Asia region. With me, I have two colleagues. Candice Young Rojansi is our Research Learning Department Knowledge Management Officer. And we have Emily San Martino with us. She's also an International Technical Advisor covering North America, and she's the coordinator for webinars. So welcome to the webinar. We have participants from all over the world. So I hope the audio is clear and you are able to listen to us. Just type it in the chat if the audio is clear. Okay, it's good to know. And just a small introduction about CAWST as well. CAWST is a training and technical support provider. We have supported more than 1,000 organizations, and we provide support in decentralized sanitation systems and household water treatment systems. That's where we focus and we specialize. This is the list of services CAWST provides. That is training workshops. We provide consulting support. We visit clients in the field, look at the issues faced by clients, and we provide troubleshooting. And we develop education and training resources. We develop on our own. We develop in consultation with the clients, and we provide this support to the clients. And we help our clients to develop new material and adapt it. And fourth in the list is conducting action research. Action research we conduct on the topics which are of interest to us and which are relevant to the clients in the field. We don't do it on academic topics, we do it on the topics which are, implementation related, which have got practical value. And we do conduct learning exchange. We have partners all around the world, and for our partners, we do conduct learning exchange. And in the learning exchanges, we, as the name suggests, we exchange ideas, we exchange experiences, and we provide information on the new topics and new skills as well. It's a good learning opportunity for us and our partners, and we do that, in different places and customized to the local situations. And through all these things, we build the capacity of organizations we work with and different clients who approach us. So with this small introduction, I will hand over the floor to my colleague Candice, and Candice will explain about the topic, the sand in the Biosand filter, and getting to the heart of the filter. Candice has got an extensive research and the field-based experience on this topic. She has written a number of papers as well. So she will present it for 25 minutes to 30 minutes. After that, the floor will be open for questions and answers. The way we do questions and answers is that please type them in the chat, and we will take the questions and respond to those. So once again, Candice will present now. After that, the floor will be open to the participants. So I welcome you all to the presentation. Candice, the floor is now for you.
Hello everyone, I'm Candice, as Sunil has introduced me. I'm here in Calgary while he's in India, and Emily is in America. So we're presenting this webinar from 3 different countries. I'm not going to keep the webcam on for the whole presentation. I just wanted to say hello. You can all see that I'm a real person, even though it's quite late at night here in Calgary. And with that, I'll turn off my webcam and get started. So the scope of today's webinar is to look specifically at the sand when it comes to the Biosand filter. I'm assuming that most people who are attending today have some knowledge or experience with Biosand filters, so I'm not going to describe in any detail the filter itself. By the end of the webinar, I'm hoping that you'll be able to explain how the Biosand filter sand removes pathogens from the water, identify the most important characteristics of filter sand, and list some tools that can be used to analyze sand characteristics. This is just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at over the next little while. We'll first go over why we use the filter, how the sand removes pathogens, what characteristics are important in describing filter sand, how to prepare it, and finally, I'll describe some tools for testing it. However, before we get too far into the different details today about Biosand filter sand, I want us to always keep in mind the reason why we're doing this. You don't want to get perfect sand in your filters in order so that Sunil is happy or that those of us in CAWST are satisfied or someone else. We're doing this, we're working with Biosand filters in order to save people's lives by reducing preventable waterborne deaths and illnesses. This isn't a technical or a theoretical reason. People are actually drinking the water coming out of these filters, and we want to make sure that it's as safe as we possibly can make it. Now, when I did this presentation once before, a colleague's response to me was, "Who knew that sand could be so complicated?" And I don't want that to be the main thing that anyone walks away from here today. The Biosand filter is a simple technology to make, to use, and to maintain. But since it is a biological process, there are lots of really interesting and fascinating things happening inside, behind the scenes. And you don't need to become an expert on everything that I'm talking about today in order to have a successful project. It's good to know these things, though, when you're making decisions in the field. It can give you some background when you're making these decisions. And remember that you've always got CAWST and our international technical advisors to help you have successful WASH projects, including Biosand filter projects. You can always contact us for help. Now, most of the things I'm going to talk about are in the Biosand filter construction manual. If you don't have a copy, you can download one from our website. And so we go on. Why do we use the filter? Biosand filters are used to remove pathogens, which are making people ill. The primary goal is improved water quality for improved health, health being the real thing that we're getting at here, especially young children. There are 4 main classes of pathogens. They're all different sizes. And the processes involved in removing these pathogens are different. So the largest of the pathogens are the helminths, or the worms. This is the only time I'm going to mention them. They're so large that pretty much the only way you could have a Biosand filter project that doesn't remove helminths is if you forget about the sand altogether. They're going to be removed. The protozoa are smaller than helminths, but they're also removed very well by Biosand filters, even if the sand is off. So we're not going to focus on them. We're going to mostly be focusing on the bacteria and the viruses because they're a bit trickier, especially the viruses. They're particularly difficult to remove or inactivate, and they are believed to cause a very large proportion of children's diarrhea. Rotavirus alone is thought to cause up to 450,000 children's deaths per year, which is about 37% of diarrheal deaths. So I'm just going to get you to think for a second. If a virus was the size of a chickpea or chana or garbanzo bean, how large do you think a grain of filter sand would be in comparison? Number 1, an elephant. Number 2, an airplane. Or number 3, a football pitch. The answer is a football pitch. Viruses are really, really tiny. So now we're going to look at what's happening inside the biosand filter. And this is kind of difficult. In the pictures, the microbes look about the same size as the grains of sand. However, as we just discussed, some of these microbes are actually much, much, much smaller. It's just very difficult to picture that. So the first main process, and this is the easiest to think about, is straining. This is similar to when you're cooking pasta or something, and you need to pour the noodles into a strainer for the water to go out, and the large solid objects are captured in the strainer. Now, the pore size of the sand is smaller than the larger organisms, like the worms and helminths, and so they get trapped on the surface of the filter. And even a brand new biosand filter will be quite good at removing worms simply because they're too big to pass through the pores. Over time, silt and different things get stuck on the top of the filter, and this reduces the pore size even more, and the filter becomes even better at removing larger organisms, and better and better until the user gets irritated because the filter is working too slowly, and then they do some maintenance. Mechanical trapping is not an important way that bacteria or viruses are removed from the filter, though. The pore spaces are just too large to actually trap those smaller organisms. Adsorption is when the microbes get stuck to the sand grains. Here I have two photos. These are of the biolayer, or the Schmutzdecke, on a regular slow sand filter taken using an electron microscope. You can see that the sand grains in the picture are covered with a fibrous, scaly coating that is the biofilm. Now, the entire filter is biologically active, but this biolayer is the most important for protozoan and bacterial removal. Viruses are removed through the whole filter bed in contrast. They get stuck to sand grains through biological processes as well, but also due to physical and chemical forces working on them. All these forces tend to be rather weak, though, so if the flow rate of a filter is too high, bacteria and viruses will wash back off the sand grains and get back into the water. And the forces holding the viruses seem to be weaker, so this is a bigger problem with viruses than with bacteria. One of the more complicated removal processes is predation. The natural ecosystem contains complicated food chains that have different organisms eating or being eaten. We're generally familiar with food chains on a larger scale. The mouse eats the grass, the snake eats the mouse, the hawk eats the snake, as in this picture here. Nature creates balance within the system so that the populations remain at fairly stable levels. Now, the same thing happens on the microbial scale in rivers and lakes. Other microorganisms that prey on our pathogens already exist within the ecosystem. If a pathogen is present in the system, then a predator can also be found within the system. So in the biosand filter, one of the things that we're working on is to capture these predators of pathogens. Then we're giving them their ideal living conditions and feeding them so that they'll multiply. And this mechanism is thought to be really important for bacterial removal. In this case, the sand is acting in a couple of different ways. One is to provide this perfect home environment for the predators. Some of the predators are mobile and swim, but others are not. And the comparatively large surface areas provided by the sand particles give them a home. So another purpose of the sand is to provide a surface for capturing food. So organisms which are stuck to surfaces, like biofilms, are easier to prey on, even for the mobile organisms. So the final of our four mechanisms is natural death. Organisms that are stuck to the sand grains or are just happen to be in the filter may starve or just reach the end of their life stage without having a chance to reproduce. And the living conditions within the filter are not optimal for most of these organisms, so they just die off in the time that the water is remaining in the filter. So there are two processes that occur over time to help the filter improve functioning. The first is called filter ripening. This is mainly referring to the biolayer. It takes a few weeks to a month to fully develop, and it allows the filter to remove bacteria and protozoa. The second process is media aging. This process is less understood, and it is a different process. It takes much longer, so 6 months to a year, it's believed to be. It's over the entire filter depth, and it's thought to have more to do with mineral deposition and biological communities deep within the filter bed. And this seems to be important for virus removal. So going over some of the characteristics of sand, before we get into the different ways we can describe this sand, we want to think about some of the ways that the sand qualities affect the removal mechanisms that we were just talking about. So these things are all related to one another, but I want to draw attention to them. So remembering that bacteria and viruses are largely removed from the filter by adsorption, that is being stuck to a sand grain, one way to make it more likely that they're going to get stuck is by having a large number of surfaces for them to get stuck to. So we want to have as much surface area as possible with our sand. Now, flow rate is something that's absolutely critical. The microbes, especially the viruses, but also the bacteria, tend to be only weakly attached to the sand grains. If the flow rate is too fast, they're going to wash back off the sand. I was recently emailing with a client whose filters weren't working as well as they should. They were at a school using the filter for testing, just for learning. So they were taking very frequent bacteria tests, and they could see that it wasn't removing as much as they expected. Their maximum flow rate was 600 milliliters per minute, which is higher than CAWST recommendation of 400. And by lowering their flow rate, just lowering their flow rate alone to the recommended level, they saw an immediate difference in their filter performance in terms of bacterial removal. So as a caution, you might have filters that are running fast, and you've tested the bacteria, and the bacteria seems to be okay, so you think that everything's all right. However, viruses and bacteria are very different from one another, and they're removed in different ways. Viruses are held much more weakly onto the sand particles. They wash off much more easily. If you're only testing E. coli or bacteria, you're not going to see that you have a problem with viruses re-entering the water. So even if your bacteria appears to be fine, if your flow rate is off, there is a risk that your water isn't what it should be. So the pore size is also important. This is the space between the particles. And one of the reasons is for mechanical trapping, as we've already discussed, but however, that isn't a main factor for bacteria and viruses. But by having smaller pores, you're forcing the water to make many bends and turns as it navigates its way through the sand. And all of this bending increases the chances that our bacteria and viruses will come in contact with sand and then hopefully stick to it. So it's kind of like walking down an empty, straight road. You're not very likely to touch anything. Now, if you think of going to a marketplace, a crowded marketplace, even if there aren't any people, just stalls, you're more likely to bump into something just because the aisles are narrow. There has been quite a lot of research on grain size, and it's pretty clear that the smaller the grain size, the better the filter performance. Smaller grain sizes lead to higher surface areas, slower flow rates, and smaller pore sizes. So we use two measures to describe the sand size. The first is the maximum grain size, and this is the diameter of your largest sand grain. In practice, this is usually the size of the sieve that you use during your sand prep. It may not be, however. If you've purchased sand and it all goes through the sieve quite easily, then your maximum grain size might actually be smaller than your sieve. and that's generally okay unless your filter is running too slow. Now the effective size is different from the maximum size. Now the grains at the maximum size help the filter to flow faster within reason. The grains at the effective size are what contribute more to the pore size and the sand's resistance to flow. So the effective size is the diameter of the 10th percentile of the grains. This means that 10% of the grains of sand are smaller than this grain size, and 90% of the grains of sand are larger than this grain size. So an example would be if you took 100 people and made them stand in line from tallest to shortest. The person 10 in from the shortest end would be the 10th percentile height. Now there's always a 10th percentile of any group of things. Even if you have 100 pens that are almost identical, you're still going to have tiny differences, and one of them is going to be your 10th percentile pen, just by definition. Just as there's always something that's the longest and the shortest, or the heaviest and the lightest. You measure your effective size using a sieve analysis. However, you can also get a pretty good idea of your effective size just by looking at your flow rate. If your flow rate is good, then your effective size is probably within the right range. So just to kind of go over that concept, what I'd like for you to do is to take a look at these 4 different sands. Just think which of these sands looks to you as if it would represent a high effective size, or which one has the highest effective size. Now, if you picked A, then you're correct. Good job. A has the highest effective size. The 10th percentile in this picture is still quite large. So the size distribution is a description of whether your sand grains are all the same size or whether there are a lot of different sizes all mixed together. So like with most things in life, we want lots of diversity in our sand. This helps us to balance the challenge of having the smallest possible pore spaces and the highest surface area possible without having a filter that's so slow that nobody would ever use it. So if all of the sand grains were really tiny, the filter would be really excellent at removing pathogens, but no one would use it because it was too slow. If all the sand grains were large, then the flow rate would be higher, but the filter wouldn't remove anything. So we want a good range of sizes. By making sure that we have some on the larger end, closer to our maximum grain size, we make sure that the filter is fast enough to be useful. And by making sure that we have lots on the smaller end, closer to our effective grain size, we make sure that the filter is actually working. So the size distribution uniformity coefficient, a uniformity coefficient close to 1 means that they're all similar in size, while a higher number means that they're different from one another. So going back to our little example, I challenge you to take a look at these 4 examples of filter sand. 2 of them have a very low uniformity coefficient. So take a moment and see if you can figure out which 2 have a low uniformity coefficient. So it is sands A and D. You can see in these pictures for both sand size A and D, the grains are all about the same size. In the case of A, they're very large, and in the case of D, they're quite small, but they're all similar. So one of the other parameters that we're interested in is the silt content. Silt is the very tiny powdery grains in the sand. We want to limit the amount of silt that we have in our sand. When there's too much silt, the flow rate in your filter will be slow to begin with, but then the silt washes out and the flow rate will increase. when the filter is first installed and the person installing it tests the flow rate, it might appear to be just fine, but you don't test it every day afterwards, so you won't be able to tell that the silt is washing out. The flow rate is going up. And neither you nor the person drinking the water will know that the filter is no longer working as well as it could. So one of our international technical consultants was recently helping investigate some filters that were having problems, and it turned out that this was what was causing it. On the other hand, you do want some fine material left in the sand to give more surface area and to keep the flow rate slower. So it's a bit of a balance. Two of these sands would likely have too low a flow. Can you or deduct which two of these would have too low a flow rate to begin with? So it would be sands B and D. They are very filled in. You can't see any gaps, suggesting that there's a lot of silt and that the effective grain size is too low. So other parameters are things like organics. What we mean by organics are the little bits of decaying plant and animal material that can be found in the sand. It might be visible, like a leaf in this example, but usually it's less visible, like microorganisms. This is mainly a problem with sand that comes from near the surface of the ground. The main concern with organics in the filter is that they're a food source. The thing is that we want to create a food chain situation in our filter where the pathogens are the things that are getting eaten, where they're the main food source. However, if there are other food sources within the sand, things get out of balance. The predators might eat these other food sources instead of the pathogens that we want them to eat, or other organisms might take over the filter that like this organic food source in the sand and crowd out the predators that we're trying to cultivate. What sometimes happens when there's lots of organics is that the coliforms get really happy in the filter, and you end up with more total coliforms coming out of the filter than were going in. And if you're using total coliforms as a test of how well your filter is working, this will probably make things very confusing, and it'll look as if the filter is actually contaminating the water. Another thing that happens with the sand with organics is that the organics often have pathogens in it. And so you have actual pathogens that you're adding to your water instead of purifying it. Getting rid of organics is extremely difficult. You need to heat the sand to very high temperatures to burn them off. It's almost always better to find a new sand source in these situations. Sand chemistry is something I get a lot of questions about what type of rock the sand should come from and how. It's not clear. There's about whether or not the sand chemistry makes very much of a difference. In most cases, the answer is that it really doesn't matter that much. The fact that it's controversial means that even if there is an impact, it would be very small. So long as you take reasonable precautions. If something is coming from a radioactive or poisonous site, then obviously you don't want to be using that sand. One exception about sand sources, rock sources, is limestone. In these cases, the calcium in the limestone tends to dissolve in the water going through the filter, and very strange things can happen that can create opportunities to be created, which stop the filter from working very effectively. This is pretty rare, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you don't know whether your sand is limestone or not, then it probably isn't. It's the sort of thing that other people would be having problems with if they're using that same quarry source, and it would affect everything. Now, another common question is about salt. We recommend that you stay away from sand that has salt in it. Several staff have run into cases where the sand has been contaminated with salt, like when there's salty groundwater. They found that if the sand is very, very well washed before being put in the filter, it is possible to remove the salt, but it's very, very difficult. So it's generally better to find a new sand source if this is a problem. Now, the shape of the sand is not critically important, but I do get lots of questions about it, and it can play a role in treatment performance. In most of the pictures I've used in this presentation, I've been drawing sand as circles, but that's not how sand is in real life. An uneven, angular sand grain from a quarry will have a much larger surface area than an eroded, smooth sand grain, such as from a beach or a river. Now, the rounder sand, because it has this lower surface area, won't work very well at the beginning of the filter's life. However, studies have shown that this angularity issue is one of the least important sand characteristics in the long-term performance of a filter. Because after a year or so of working, once you have mineral deposits and biofilms, your sand grains all end up with without a smooth finish, because there's these scaly biofilms on them. And so the performance of filters that had angular versus rounded sand, it seems to converge over time. Now, if at all possible, sand should be coming from a rock quarry, because this sand has a nice distribution of sizes. It's angular, so it'll work well from the get-go, and it has little organic contamination. You can ask the local roadworks or construction companies for information on where to find the quarry. If you're really stuck, you can contact CAWST, and it's possible that our technical advisors might be able to assist you. They might have heard of a good quarry. In the unlikely situation that there isn't a rock quarry available, which does happen sometimes, but it is unusual, the next best choice is a sand quarry. The sand is more likely to have organic contamination, though, than from a rock quarry. Now, aside from having lots of contaminants in them because they're close to the surface, both beach and desert sand are not at all appropriate to use as filter media because they tend to have very similar grain sizes. They don't have a good grain size distribution. Like we were previously discussing. Now, a really common one that we find is people using river sand. We don't recommend using it. The sand isn't clean. It tends to have a lot of organics and pathogens in it. If, however, there are situations where it's a river or nowhere, in that case, taking from the river banks is better than taking from the river bottom, because but even then, I do a lot of testing to make sure that the filter is working properly, because it's possible that it won't work very well. There are just too many decaying organisms providing too much food in the filter. That perfect ecosystem that we're trying to create will become distorted. Now, in the case of the sand in the bottom of the river, with that, it usually has a low uniformity coefficient, so poor distribution. You can use the river sand for the construction, however, that's perfectly fine. But for the actual treatment, the quarry sand from a rock quarry is really much better. Now remember that the purpose for us building filters is to keep people from getting sick, and really in some cases people's lives are at stake. So it's worth doing it in a way that really does keep them from getting sick. So this is a high responsibility, and it's not just about finding sand for the sake of having sand in your filter. It's about making the filter that works. So if you're in a situation where you don't have an appropriate sand source, really try to talk to other filter producers or get in contact with CAWST to see if it might even be better to use a different household water treatment method, such as ceramic filters or something, instead of using an inappropriate sand. So the final sand parameter is the depth of the sand. The sand depth contributes to the filtration in several different ways. One is that deeper sand gives you more pore volume, which means that you can dose more water. Because with Biosand filter, water needs to be in contact with the sand during the pause period. So the amount of water that you can pour through at any time is limited by how much pore space you have in the sand to accommodate a new dose. But with deeper sand, you also have more surface area that each water drop comes in contact with. Deeper sand also reduces the flow rate and provides more resistance to flow. So this table here is just a summary of our recommended parameters for Biosand filter sand, where the maximum flow rate is for a clean bed, so it's for a brand new filter that hasn't been ripened yet, at the very, very beginning of the filter run, which is the fastest time. Once you start clogging your filter, then you should be seeing the maximum flow rate for a given run being much lower. Now, if you end up with something a little bit higher, then it's not critical. But if you're going to like 0.5, then you've really got to look at finding a solution to your flow rate. This 0.4 meters cubed per meter squared per hour with the V10 concrete filter, this comes to about 400 milliliters per minute for that first minute. And the sand depth of the V10 is 54.5 centimeters. But there are many other versions of Biosand filters out there. The V10 isn't the only one. The sand does need to follow these parameters regardless of the type of filter that you're using, or Biosand filter that you're using. So once you've found a good sand source, what's next? The Biosand filter manual goes into quite a lot of detail about how to prepare the sand. So I'm not actually going to talk about this much. You sieve it, you wash it by filling your bucket with clear water, swirling around the water using your hand or a stick or a spoon, dumping the water out of the bucket, holding back the sand with your hand so it doesn't fall out. You pour your water down a drain or into a settling tank, and if you're using a settling tank, you can reuse your. So we have three main tools available for checking the appropriateness of our filter sand. The simplest is the flow test. The more in-depth method is the sieve analysis. And the jar test is used during feeling for your silt. So instructions for the jar test can be found in your Biosand filter manual. It's used while you're washing your sand. There are different ways of doing it. Different people have different ways. Moving on to the flow test. The flow test is probably the most important measure that you have. It measures you're measuring the fastest flow of your filter. There are several different variations of the flow test as well. One being to measure how much water is filtered over 1 minute. The other is the amount of time it takes for the filter to filter a particular volume of water. For example, 500 milliliters. We've tested in our office both methods to see how different they are, and they come up with approximately the same results. The important thing is that you're measuring at the fastest point. If you take a minute to jump from having poured the water in your bucket to grabbing your timer, that's not a big deal. but if you're taking, say, 5 minutes, then you are going to be getting a slower flow rate than what your maximum was. Our recommendation for the standard concrete filter is 400 milliliters per minute, because this is equivalent to 0.4 meters cubed per meter squared per hour. If you're going to use a different filter, you have to calculate the surface area of that filter, and then you can convert it to a milliliter per minute value. Or you can contact us and we can help you if you know the surface area of your filter. So because viruses, which are more loosely attached to the filter bed, can be more easily resuspended than bacteria, which are more likely to be killed or attached in the biofilm, it really isn't enough to only measure coliforms or E. coli coming out of the filter as a test of whether or not it's working. Because if it's running too fast, this shows that there is a problem, even if your bacteria tests are good, because your viruses still could be getting resuspended. So if we remember our important things to keep in mind, you might have noticed that they all fit together. If you have a larger surface area and a more tortuous flow path, you're going to have a slower flow rate. For this reason, if your resources are limited, the flow rate test is the one that'll give you the most bang for your buck. The flow rate, it's important in and of itself, but it's also a good indicator as to whether or not these other things are in place too. So doing a sieve analysis isn't as complicated as you might think. We have an instructional video. We have instructions on how to build a sieve set, on how to do the analysis. There's an app and an Excel spreadsheet tool to help you with the calculations. Also, if you have access to in-country resources to do the analysis, like a university soils lab, you can go that route, but it isn't necessary. If you have any difficulties at all with this, send us an email and we can help you out. So with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Sunil. I'd like to thank you for your attention. I went a little bit over the time that Sunil had asked me to take, but I hope you'll all forgive me. And back to you, Sunil.
Yeah, thank you, Candice. I appreciate it. Dear participants, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and we'll take them, as much as possible, and one by one in order. Anyway, we have one question already from Ivan Tabor, and he says, what about if you get river sand and wash them? So, yeah, I mean, I'll just take a first shot, and then I'll request Candice also to join. In the case of river sand, if you wash, some of the pathogens, they are stuck to the sand particles so much that even if you wash, they won't come out that easily. And another reason is that these particles are so rounded that their uniformity coefficient may not suit our requirements. So because of those reasons, even if you take the river sand and wash them, they are not that helpful. So do you agree, Candice?
Yeah, just to agree with that. That with river sand, there are these issues. You don't see the contamination, the organic contamination on the sand grains. So it's not really possible for you to know whether you've actually removed everything or not by washing. They're quite strongly attached to the sand grains. That said, at the beginning, when Dr. Mans was first promoting the Biosand filter, he was talking about getting the sand from rivers, and I went to one of his courses in like 2001, and those filters were still removing E. coli. They were still working. They just weren't working as well as we now know the filter is capable of doing. So if there's absolutely no other option, taking riverbank sand might work. I would strongly recommend that you do some testing though, but usually there are better options.
Yeah, thank you, Candice. And a couple of participants have asked questions like, will we have access to this presentation at a later time? Certainly, all this webinar is recorded and is being recorded, and it would be available on our website. And it is resources.cawst.org, and in the search you put webinar and videos, you will get this one, and put the title as well, Biosand. So certainly the entire video recording with the presentation, it's available. So moving on to take a couple of questions more. We'll take questions until 10 o'clock Indian, 10 o'clock Calgary time, 10 p.m. Calgary time. So somebody asked, Emily Obuya, can you comment on the reusability of the sand? Candice mentioned heat treatment or just using new sand. Which one is more effective? So once again, I request Candice to answer this question. That is, can you comment on the reusability of the sand?
The sand is reusable. When I was talking about heat treatment, I was talking about in the case of when you know that there's organic contamination. In that case, one of the only ways to remove organics is by very high heat, and that tends not to be cost effective. I haven't heard of a situation where they were able to remove the organics in a cost-effective way. So in that case, finding a new sand source is more effective. But in terms of just reusing the sand, yeah, you don't need. You can just reuse the sand. That's fine.
Okay, thank you, Candice. Moving on to the next question. What is the acceptable flow rate for version 8 filter? 400 to 600 ml per minute? That is the question. I would say we say it as 600 ml per minute, around 600 ml. If you get lower than that, it's fine. Only thing is that the flow rate would be lower, but still, you know, it's fine. So 400 to 600 is a good one, yeah. So that's a question from Jason Berry. So I hope you listen to my response. And we move on because we have more questions. This is from the Lawrence Mose. The question is there a need to disinfect sand and gravel bed with chlorine prior to the beginning use of the filter? So once again, I repeat the question. Is there a need to disinfect the sand and gravel bed with chlorine prior to the use of the filter? So please, Candice, take this question once again.
No, there's not. Not at all. Actually, you do want to have some natural organisms in your sand, and everything else tends to just die off. It really depends. If you're using sand that you have a strong reason to believe has been contaminated, for example, if I've seen this happen. If there are dogs that have maybe defecated on your sand pile, then I would chlorinate it, because you have a strong reason to believe that there could be pathogens on the sand. But if the sand is being sourced from a quarry and it's only been just exposed to the air and transport, it's unlikely to have a lot of fecal contamination, which is what our main concern is. And so it's not necessary to chlorinate it.
So, yeah, thank you very much. And people have been asking questions. So it is, once again, regarding our website, it is resources.cawst.org. Resources is plural with an S. So, and once again, how long can this sand be used? That's the question from Ivan Tabor. How long can the sand be used? Actually, if someone is not removing the sand, it can be used as long as a filter exists. And we say that a filter exists for 20 years, easily, a concrete filter. As long as a filter exists, sand will remain and it need not be removed from it. So sand can be used for the life of the filter. I hope I answered that question. And again, I'm moving on. It's a question from Jason Berry. I'm just taking in the chronological order. And the next question is, should the outlet pipe of BSF be disinfected with chlorine? Concern is people will not use filter due to aversion to chlorine. So once again I invite Candice to respond to this question. Should the outlet pipe of BSF be disinfected with chlorine?
This is a question that's a little bit up in the air at CAWST. I think in the past it was recommended to disinfect the outlet, but I believe that we no longer recommend that regularly. Is that true, Sunil? Do you recommend it?
Yeah, now that's right. Now we don't recommend it because we believe that the natural course of cleaning the filter, natural course of the biolayer building up, and natural course of cleaning of the outlet tube because of the water flow will happen. Mm-hmm. So we are not recommending it anymore. But it's up to the people because,
yeah. Another thing that happened was because it used to be that the filters had the half-inch PVC pipe for their outlet pipes, in which case the pipe wasn't always filled with water because it would operate using weir flow. And like I personally have seen in the field things like spiders taking up residence inside that outlet pipe. But since about, I think, 2011-ish, maybe earlier, with the switch to the V9, we've started to use the 1/4-inch acrylic tubing, which works in siphon. And so in this case, the tube is always filled with water, so you don't have the chance for things to crawl up. If you look at a filter that's like a functioning installed filter, you'll see that there's still water just hanging there at the outlet pipe. So you don't have this creatures crawling inside.
Okay, thank you very much. For the benefit of the participants, I typed it in the chat window, our website address. The resources website can be accessed two ways: resources.cawst.org. Sorry, there was a typo when I typed it. Resources.cawst.org. I am typing again. And there is another one is www.cawst.org/resources. So two ways you can access. So I typed them. And the CAWST trainer also typed it. You please see Emily has typed it too as well for the construction manual. Going back to a couple of more questions we have here by Victor Etimo Ubain. Victor asks a question: is, do pathogens percolate through the sand bed over time? Anyway, Candice has answered that. Did you answer that fully, Candice? Do,
I could go and answer that a little bit more clearly. The
yeah.
the pathogens, it depends. They're not very strongly adsorbed to the sand, and so they do move through. However, most have rather short lifespans. So in the amount of time it takes for the pathogen to make its way through the sand bed, it's usually dead. So there's a difference between things being permanently removed or things being inactivated, and so it is possible that like the dead pathogens are making it out, but most usually, yeah, you wouldn't have live pathogens making it through the sand bed over time.
Okay, so thank you very much. There is one more question, and we have roughly 3 to 4 minutes. And next question is, I'm going to read out to Candice, but before that, I think after that also we can take 1 or 2 questions more. So if you have any other question, please quickly type them. But meanwhile, I read out one of the questions from Sokchia Brown. Sorry if my pronunciation is not good with the names. I apologize, but anyway, from the question. And the question is, I wanted to ask you about BSF installation. Sometimes when we install and pour the water in the filter, for 1 to 3 months, unclear water is coming out. Why is that? What is it making this water unclear? Is it the sand or anything else? So once again, I request Candice to answer. Yes, Candice, please go ahead.
I think in most cases, if you see something like this, you probably had some silt in your sand, and that's what's coming out. Is that silt cleaning kind of cleaning its way through the filter? In other cases, well, it depends. If it stops after 3 months, then it's probably the silt. That it's just taking that long for the silt to wash its way out. If it's something that's happening in a much longer term, then it could be that you're having biofilms that are shedding into the water.
Okay, thank you very much. And once again, Victor has asked a question. It's more of a comment. He says that sometimes mold will grow in the outlet tube and have to be cleaned and disinfected. Certainly, when the filters are in use, the outlet tube, it needs to be cleaned from the outside because of various reasons. The children can touch the outlet tube from outside. Even the users, adults can touch them. And like now Victor is saying that mold will grow. So anyway, our previous response was for the installation. Before you install the filter, do you clean the outlet tube? But now Victor seems to be making a comment regarding the cleaning of the outlet tube when it is in use. Certainly yes. In our manual also we mentioned that how to maintain the filter, how to clean the outlet tube, how to clean the safe storage container. Yes. Thank you, Victor, for that comment. We appreciate. And Ajit Madhavan has asked a question. We have got time, so as per my watch, I mean we are just hitting the time, but anyway, we'll take a couple of more questions. That is, what is the log reduction in pathogen load that the sand filter will achieve? So once again, I request Candice to respond to this question. What is the log reduction in pathogen load that the sand filter will achieve?
That's a difficult question to answer. With the different pathogens, it's a bit different. With the helminths, I would guess it would be, I don't know, in the order of log 5 or log 4. protozoa, there's only been a couple of experiments where they've used protozoa, and they were finding very high log removal rates, so greater than log 3, log 4. In terms of bacteria, it's more commonly in the between log 1.5 and log 2. So if you have a filter running at log 2, that's pretty good for bacteria removal. They often don't achieve log 2, but they're kind of in that range. For viruses, it's a little bit more, it varies a lot. In most studies I've seen, you'd be hard pressed to get log 1 removal. It'd be less than log 1, say log 0.7. But for some universities, they get even as high as log 4. So it seems like there's some unknown things impacting the virus removal. So it's hard to answer that one for viruses. But for bacteria, it's a lot more. It's between log 1.5 and 2 log.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take questions up to 10:35. That's India time, and 10:05 Calgary time. And that is, next question is from Mega in Patricia. How effective is BSF in cleaning sewage water? Okay, Candice,
yeah. I wouldn't use it for sewage water. The reason being that the sewage water is so rich in organics that you would have your filter continuously clogging. When they use the Biosand filter, when they use filters similar to the Biosand filter for wastewater, they are modified. They are slightly different. So, for example, with the Biosand filter for drinking water, the sand is always underwater. It's never dried out. Like, it's never permitted to dry. When they're using it for wastewater, it's different. The sand is supposed to dry out in between doses. So a Biosand, what's called a Biosand filter in the wastewater community, is a different type of filter.
Okay, thank you. This is the last question. And if you are not able to answer some questions, I'm going to take, one more question. That will be the last question. If you are not able to answer some of the questions, please don't feel bad. We will respond back by emails to the particular participant who is asking that question. So certainly, don't feel disappointed, and we'll respond back. So the last question now I'm going to request Candice to respond is, can new sand be inculcated with microbes from another active filter to accelerate the ripening process? Please, Candice, take this question.
This is an interesting question too. It's something that has been researched a couple of different times, and it does seem to be a promising direction, because you're seeding. It's called seeding the filter. It hasn't been studied enough for it to be considered a procedure, though. It's just kind of been done at a university level where they've tried it on a couple of things, and it seems promising, though.
Okay, thank you very much, all participants. It's 10:05 in Calgary.